The U.S. Senate voted to repeal a mining ban which had been in place near the Boundary Waters Wilderness. This pristine wilderness in Minnesota is full of forests and lakes, and it is actually the most visited wilderness in the United States. This has been the topic of much discussion recently in the public lands community, and I wanted to add a perspective that I have not seen represented so far. Important to note as background is that many organizations and people very much fought against repealing the ban. It was very close. The ban was repealed only by 50 votes over 49. Organizations like Save the Boundary Waters have been very much against this and have been fighting to protect the boundary waters against the threat of mining for a long time. Senator Tina Smith from Minnesota gave very impassioned speeches advocating for preserving the boundary waters. The thing is, the mine will not be in the boundary waters itself, but it will be nearby, and because of the nature of the water being interconnected, it will inevitably pollute and destroy the water there, and it will also pollute Canada as well. Because as the name indicates, this is quite near the boundary. The company that wants to put the mine in is a foreign company. It's a Chilean mining company. And this is a company that has a track record of being fined for not doing proper protections in its existing mines. Any jobs that would be provided in the mining industry would be much more temporary and actually probably would not have as much economic value as the sustainable recreation industry, which is currently in place around boundary waters visitation. In addition, the metals which are mined, which are going to be copper and also nickel, will be sent to China for processing and then sold back to the United States. So the United States is not even necessarily benefiting directly from this mine. It's important to note that this merely lifts the ban on mining that had been set in place. There is still a really extensive permitting process that the potential mine would have to go through. For people that do want to advocate for protecting the boundary waters, the fight is now kind of going to move to Minnesota and the permitting process there. It's not a guarantee at this point that the mine would go in, and that's also important to take note of. So with all of that being said, I wanted to add my hot take. I mean, there's been so much discussion on the internet about this already. Lots of people are very upset. But something that I find kind of interesting about the conversation that's taking place is many of the advocates for protecting the boundary waters and for not putting the mine in are saying, oh, I understand that we do need to mine these minerals. It just shouldn't happen here. It should happen elsewhere where there's less risk of contamination. But like, of course we do need to mine, and we do need these minerals because we need to keep growing the industries that rely on these minerals. I think environmentalists are really scared of appearing too extreme, and so there's a lot of sort of like concessions to this logic of industry and this logic of industrial development where people say like, oh yeah, we do need to mine, we do need to grow. And my question is, do we actually though? I think the current generation of environmental activists are often too timid. We really want to appear reasonable and moderate, but in doing so, we allow this mindset of endless growth and industrial capitalism to really limit what we can imagine for ourselves, for our planet, and for our society. We take for granted that endless growth and endless resource extraction is necessary, and I just really want us to ask, is it though? The minerals that would be extracted in this mine are used in a wide range of industries. That is true, but is it necessary that we continue to expand these industries, especially when the population is projected to go down sometime later this century? Which another hot take is, I think, actually a good thing. One that should be celebrated because we are finally within sight of the limits of human population growth and potentially having this amazing opportunity to live in better balance with our planet once again. Even if the population were to remain at its current level, it's really important to note that so much of the unsustainable consumption and systems is driven by people in wealthy countries. People in less wealthy countries are not consuming nearly so much, and this really disproportionate consumption is especially driven by people here in the United States. Our level of consumption, especially here in the United States, is so unnecessarily high. We do not need all of the things that we have. We live with our lives filled with so much junk and so much e-waste, so much waste and everything, and we don't need it. We do not need to be consuming this much. We do not need to be extracting this much to fuel this endless unsustainable consumption. I know that some people are probably going to be like, well, you're filming this on a phone that relies on these minerals, and it's like, well, I'm filming this on a phone because currently using these technologies is like pretty much the only way to reach an audience. But I actually think my life was a lot better before phones came out, like iPhones, smartphones came out. I think about that a lot. Like, we have so much of these technologies that are pushed on us that are now deemed as essential, and I think our lives were, first of all, potentially better in a lot of ways ways before them, particularly before the rise of social media. I think people are finally waking up to the idea that technology is not always an improvement. And also, even though smartphones do have a lot of useful features and maybe they make our lives more convenient in a lot of ways, we don't need to be producing so many of them. We don't need a new phone every single year. We don't need to waste the phones that already exist. We could institute better methods for recycling our vast quantities of e-waste, which are often sent to poorer countries at this point and recycled in ways that are really bad for human health there. Let's put our resources into figuring out ways to recycle all of the e-waste that we already have instead of destroying wildernesses to extract new resources for new phones that we don't even need. Outside of technology, our lives, speaking for people who live in wealthy countries like the United States, are driven by so much unnecessary consumption of all kinds of products. We don't need to buy so many new cars. We don't need to buy so many new clothes. We don't need so much new everything. It doesn't make us happy. It entraps us in cycles of debt and spending. It clutters our homes. I think arguably it makes us unhappy. Some products are necessary. Some products do improve our lives, but I think we just have so much junk that we don't need. We do not need all of this. Do we need then to center so much of our society around extracting endless resources and finding every little mineral that is still buried in the earth somewhere and destroying the planet to get it? The United States does not need to spend such obscene amounts of money and material resources on completely unnecessary wars. Congressman Pete Stauber, who is from Minnesota and who initially introduced this resolution of disapproval of the mining ban, wrote an op-ed which was very interesting, in which he expressed his view that we should mine near the boundary waters to support industry. And as a specific example, he used the warplanes that are currently being flown in Iran. He thought this was a great example to highlight of why we should destroy the boundary waters, why this is a reasonable choice to make. Warplanes for what? This war, once again, completely unnecessary. A war in which the United States is actively committing war crimes. We bombed a school full of children. We've spent billions and billions of dollars on this war, when apparently, according to the Trump administration, we don't have enough money for the National Park Service or scientific research. And he wrote this op-ed as though this were a great idea and this was like this really rational thing. And this is not rational. This is not a good reason to destroy this wilderness, which has benefit for current Americans, future generations of Americans, if we can manage to preserve it. And also, I strongly believe that the other species who share our planet also deserve consideration. We are not the only species that lives here, and this planet does not exist for human resource extraction. I understand that some of the representatives actually do have that as their worldview, so there's a strain of Christian dominionism which views the earth as something being given by God to humans from which to extract resources. Now, some versions of Christianity view this more as a stewardship thing, where it's like, yes, God gave this to us, but we also need to take care of it responsibly. However, it was also very interesting that on the day of the vote, Congressman Stauber posted a Bible verse which he apparently believes backs up his claim that this exists for us to extract resources from in this really irresponsible way that all the science says is going to pollute this area pretty much irreversibly. I am not a Christian, and I do not believe that. And not all Christians believe that. I really want to highlight that. Many Christians do support respect for our planet and for God's amazing creation. For those of us like me who are not Christian, I find this dominionist view to be very much objectionable, and I find that it tramples on my spiritual beliefs, which is that we need to exist with respect for the other species who share our planet, for the planet itself, and that it does not belong to us. We have a responsibility to live in balance, not to extract everything that we possibly can, because we are going to destroy the planet. We're destroying other species, and ultimately we will destroy ourselves. And in order for us to get to that place of balance, we need to actually have respect for the planet that we live on. That means not growing endlessly. That means not extracting everything that we possibly can and destroying whatever it takes to make a few more dollars. And while I understand that environmental moderates are perhaps making these concessions, saying like, oh, well, we do need to mine because it's part of our political reality currently, I also want there to be a place in the conversation to people to question the assumptions of the society that we live in, to question the idea that we actually do need to do any of these things, because actually we do not. We need to start questioning that economic framework, that moral framework, and that societal framework that tells us that any of these things are necessary. And I strongly believe that this is a vision we need to achieve to live better lives as humans and as members of this amazing planet.